welcome to this NHS Clinical Commissioners webinar about conditions for which over-the-counter items should not be routinely prescribed in primary care. This webinar is for CCG Lay members, so it's really good to have a number of you participating this afternoon. My name is Julie Wood, I'm Chief Executive of NHS Clinical Commissioners, but I'm also joined on this webinar by Bhavna Reddy, who's a specialist pharmacist at NHS England and who has been involved in supporting the detail behind all of this work. So myself and Bhavna are going to take us through a presentation, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and comments. If you can type your question in as we're going through, that would be great. When we get to the end of the presentation, if we haven't got a huge number of people joining us, then if people do actually want to speak rather than type in their question, we can unmute you, and we can do things that way, as long as you're in a quiet place where we haven't got lots of background noise. So I'm going to kick us off and explain what we're trying to do today in this session. So the agenda for today is to tell you a bit about why we're doing this, and then to get into the actual proposals themselves, which are currently out for consultation, and then to talk a bit about what CCGs need to do now, and then, as I said at the beginning, have an opportunity for questions and answers. This is about, I can't remember how many webinars we've had now, quite a few. We've had certainly 2 with CCG people so far, and we've done other ones as well. So hopefully this won't be the first time you know about this work, but this is part of a whole wider range of webinars and public-facing events. So the objectives for the work, why are we doing this? There are, if the slides will move. Bear with me, the slides don't want to move. Colleagues in London, at NHSCC offices, can you do something about,
yeah, we're just grabbing Sean.
They're moving now, they've moved way back. So, right, okay. Hopefully this will work now. So there are 5 main objectives as to why we're doing this work. The first is around prioritising limited NHS funding, and you will, I hope, know medicine spend is the second largest spend after staffing costs, and you can see in this slide that we spend just shy of £17 billion across England in 2015-16 on medicines, and that was an increase of nearly 30% from the figure 13 billion in 2010-11. So medicines consumes an awful lot of money, and we really need to think about how we prioritise the use of what is a limited NHS pot. So smarter use of resources can mean greater funding for other high priority areas that have an impact for patients, and support improvements to services and deliver transformation. So it is about prioritising the limited funding that we have available. Second reason is about supporting the principle of self-care. We know that empowering people with confidence and information gives people greater control of their health, and does also encourage behaviour that prevents ill health in the long term. So that's the second reason we are doing this. The third is that we want to do anything we can to reduce demand on general practice, as well as spending a lot of money on the medicines. It consumes an awful lot of GP consultations, 57 million GP consultations nationally a year for minor conditions at a cost of nearly £2 billion. And those appointments, slide shows, take up an average of an hour a day for every GP. So if we can liberate and realise some of those GP consultations, they can be used and redirected at other higher priority consultations and areas. The fourth is about addressing increased price and other costs. We know that for a number of the medicines we're talking about, the cost the NHS pays is actually far higher than the cost that you can buy them over the counter for, and that includes further hidden costs, including prescribing, dispensing and administration. So the one that gets quoted most often is paracetamol and ibuprofen, but there are others like antihistamines where the price the NHS pays generally is more than it would cost to purchase over the counter. And the final objective for this work is about reducing unwarranted variation. We know of many CCGs who are actively considering taking the action that we are currently consulting on, or indeed have already done so and have implemented policies to reduce spend on items we purchased over the counter. So actually having national support and a nationally coordinated set of activities like we are doing and support from NHS England for local decision making would actually help us to get greater consistency across the country and reduce unwarranted variation. So there's the reasons why we're doing it. If you look at the variation, just as an example, slides have frozen again. See if they catch up. Right. I'm very sorry about this. Right, let's try going forward again. Okay, so two sets of graphs to show you to illustrate the extent of variation. So this one is about analgesia costs per 1,000 patients between August and October 2017. Each of those orange, or yes, I think they're orange bars, represents a CCG spend. So so on the left-hand side, you'll see that those CCGs with the high graphs are spending quite a bit of money on analgesia, and on the right-hand side, the CCG represented by the final graph is spending a lot less per 1,000 patients. So that would lead you to believe that the CCGs on the right have already taken some action, whereas the CCGs on the left may not have done. So that's one graph. Another, to show you the variation, is about travel sickness costs, again per 1,000 patients, again the same sort of period, and again you can see the same sort of variation. We have shared with each CCG a graph for each of the conditions that we're talking about, so you will now know where your spend, where you sit in relation to each of those bar graphs. So you can see what your level of spend is. They came out recently in our Focus On bulletin to your medicines management leads and CCG leads. So how were the proposals developed? You will be aware, I hope, that we, over the summer period last year, consulted on the first 18 medicines that we were saying shouldn't be routinely prescribed in primary care, but we also sought initial views on the principle of whether we should or shouldn't restrict the prescribing of medicines that are readily available over the counter. And at that time, we highlighted 26 minor or self-limiting conditions that we may consider prescribing restrictions. Feedback was generally supportive. You can see there 65% agreed. So we have been working very rapidly, I would say, from then to develop some firmer proposals, which we are now obviously consulting on. We used the same clinical working group that we had used before, and we talked with that group, and it's got CCGs on it, the RCGP, the General Practitioner Committee, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, NICE, NHS England, I think are the main people who are on that group. But we consulted that group on the proposed approach, and based on their guidance, we actually mapped the over-the-counter items to the minor conditions for which they are typically prescribed. So we refined our approach to propose prescribing restrictions based on condition rather than item name or formulation. That seemed to be the best way of dealing with it. So we then looked at the data that we'd got for all those conditions, and we analysed it. Well, I think Barbara and colleagues analysed it, and that shows that 569 million was spent on over-the-counter medicines completely. But then we looked at the top 90% of spend to identify how we could classify the medicines according to the conditions for which they might be prescribed as per their licence indications. And when doing that, the figure reduced, but it's still £136 million that could be saved for use in higher priority areas. And that's what we are consulting on during this consultation phase. So I'll hand over to Barbara now.
Yeah, so this slide outlines the minor conditions for which prescriptions could potentially be restricted. Following our mapping exercise that Julie talked about, we added in an additional 9 minor conditions because we felt they were also deemed to be appropriate. And there's 2 items included in there. So vitamins and minerals and probiotics have been included as standalone categories because they have a high cost in terms of OTC spend, although we can't map their use to one single condition. We then identified the following categories within which we proposed to group each condition. So they're grouped with an item of limited clinical evidence of effectiveness, so that's the probiotics and vitamins and minerals, and then a condition that is self-limiting, so this doesn't require medical advice or treatment because it will normally clear up on its own, so it's like the common cold, but you might want to buy over-the-counter medicines for symptomatic relief. And then there's the final category of conditions that are minor ailments, which are suitable for self-care, but you can also treat them with over-the-counter items from a pharmacy. And so we consulted our clinical working group on the proposed approach, and the guidance that is now out for consultation was developed. And we proposed to make one of the following 3 recommendations for each of the conditions. So essentially, we're advising that CCGs to support prescribers in not routinely prescribing for the 3 categories. So for the limited evidence of clinical effectiveness, for the self-limiting conditions, and also for those conditions that we feel are appropriate for self-care. The key thing to note, however, is that this guidance focuses mainly on restricting prescribing for the conditions outlined, and it's not necessarily individual drugs. So we're not saying that paracetamol should never be prescribed. It's specifically for the conditions that we've outlined in there. And it's also intended to encourage people to self-care for minor illness as the first stage of treatment. We know that most people feel quite comfortable managing everyday minor conditions like coughs and colds themselves, particularly if they feel confident in recognizing the symptoms and have treated themselves before. So that's what we're encouraging. However, there are a group of patients that we feel GPs and clinicians should continue to prescribe for, and these are listed on the slide. So for the treatments of long-term conditions, for example, regular pain relief for chronic arthritis, or treatment for inflammatory bowel disease, and for treatment of more complex forms of the minor diseases, so things like severe migraines which haven't responded to over-the-counter treatment, we'd expect GPs to continue prescribing for those. There's also those patients that have symptoms that suggest the condition's not minor. They might have red flag symptoms such as a cough that lasts longer than 3 weeks. We'd expect them to see their GP. There's also the groups of patients that should continue to have their treatments prescribed on the NHS regardless. So these are patients who are on treatments for complex patients such as immunocompromised patients, patients on treatments that are only available on prescription, and then patients prescribed products that are to treat an adverse effect or a symptom of a more complex disease. So for example, they might be on something for pain which causes constipation, so they would then get a laxative. There's also a group of patients that can't buy over-the-counter medicines because of the licensing of them. So these can vary depending on the product, but this could include babies, children, or women who are pregnant. But community pharmacies will be aware of what these are, and they would advise patients accordingly. And then there's also the group of patients that the clinician considers that the presenting symptom is due to a condition that wouldn't be considered a minor ailment. So they're also included in the exception category. And finally, I think those.
Slides aren't moving again, I'm afraid.
Okay. There's also, I think, we've also included something in there around the GP being able to consider the ability to self-manage. And so this is the vulnerable patient category that we've looked at specifically so that GPs can continue to prescribe for those patients.
You've got the slide up now.
Okay, great. I seem to have turned mine off actually. Don't know what's going on there. Yeah. And so actually these are the groups of patients, these are the exemptions that we'd actually like further feedback on. So if you could give us any feedback on these, that would be great, particularly the vulnerable patient exception. So who was involved in developing the proposals? Following the initial consultation, we further engaged the clinical working group and patient groups in helping refine these draft recommendations, and in particular the exceptions that I've just talked through. We held a stakeholder event which was attended by groups including the Patient Association, National Voices and Health Watch England to test out and further shape and refine the draft proposals. As a result of the initial engagement, we were aware that there were a few concerns from professional and patient groups relating to access of over-the-counter medicines. And these are the issues that we really want to address during this consultation, and also by engaging further with patient groups that might be affected. And as I talked about before, we refined those exceptions to cover the specific exception for vulnerable patients in there as well, following our engagement. So the consultation is out at the moment. It's running for 3 months. It was out in December, so it closes on the 14th of March. There's a link there to the consultation web survey. We've got a range of face-to-face and online events already in the diary, which Julie's already talked about, and there's the opportunity obviously to provide views on the proposals within this webinar as well. From me, I think. Handing back over to Julie.
Yeah. Yes, so the way we've been communicating with our members, NHSCC members, is through these main publications, which I hope you recognise. The first is Connect, that goes out weekly on a Friday, so we've been given updates in Connect, so you should all receive Connect, and I hope avidly read it. CCG Leaders Bulletin that doesn't come to CCG Lay members directly, it goes to the leadership of CCG, so clinical chair, chief officer and chief finance officer and chief nurse. But again, we've been flagging it up in there, and then a focus on, which is just solely focusing on prescribing and medicines issues, which has been the main point of the detail really. So we've been sending that down to medicines management leads and CCG leaders as and when we need to both communicate but make sure you're aware of things so that you can take the action that you need to. So I hope you've seen all of those things. So what do CCGs need to do now? It's really, it's moving itself now, right there. So in order to ensure that the outcome of the consultation can be implemented as swiftly as possible, we are encouraging CCGs to do what you need to undertake engagement or consultation with your population in line with the requirements of the Health and Social Care Act, because just like it was for the 18 medicines, it will be each CCG's individual decision about whether or not it's going to act in accordance with the clinical commissioning guidance that will come down to you as a result of this consultation. So if you are engaging with your population now, this will allow for a rapid local decision to be made, and you wouldn't then need to go out subsequently to any further consultation or engagement. But it's up to you to decide what you need to do to comply with the requirements for engagement and consultation in accordance with the Act. So we plan to publish the finalised guidance for each condition in April 2018. It'll probably be fairly early in April 2018. So when you see that the closing date for consultation is the 14th of March, it's going to be quite rapid. So that is an absolute firm date. We won't be able to accept any comments that we receive after the 14th of March. So it's important that people do, CCGs and others do, let us have views in good time. So when you are making your own local decisions, it's for you to determine what you need to do. And we would suggest that the starting point you might need to look at is your spend. So if you are as I showed you those graphs, if you're consistently on the right-hand side of those graphs for all of the conditions, then it would sort of lead you to believe that you've actually already implemented your own policies. And if that's the case, then yes, you will want to check that the finalised guidance is, if you like, consistent with your policies, and then maybe decide you don't need to do anything else. However, if you're on the left-hand side of those graphs, then it would suggest that you do need to do some engagement. And of course, you have to act in accordance with your own policies for consultation and engagement that you are very well aware of as lay members. So as I said earlier, we have shared the levels of spend by CCG, so you have got those graphs in the January Focus on Bulletin that went out, I think, very early January. So what you need to think about is during this national consultation phase, and we would encourage you to provide a response to the national consultation using the web survey that Bhavna highlighted, based on your own local consultation and engagement activities. It could include, it's up to you, your own perspective on the guidance, the outcome of any relevant local consultations, and feedback from local engagement with patient participation groups, local community groups, represented people with protected characteristics, for example, Health Watch, discussion with the local overview and scrutiny committee of the local authority, engagement with member practices. It could be whatever you feel you need to do to be able to feed back in. If you are very supportive of the proposals, then we need you to tell us, please, because there will be organisations that will have different views, and so if we are to balance up all the different views, we need to hear them, and not just take it as an assumption that we know them already. So, following closure of the consultation on the 14th of March, NHS England will rapidly feed back to CCGs a summary of the responses. It won't be by CCG, it will be by type of respondent, so we'll be able to say the CCG community said this, the public said that generally, but we won't be able to say Leeds CCG said or Brighton CCG said, I'm afraid. But we will give that general feedback. We will then also rather rapidly, using the clinical working group again, review the responses that we receive, and we will reflect on them and what we hear, and finalise clinical commissioning guidance, which we will publish in April. And the expectation is, as before, that you have to statutorily have due regard to the guidance when you take your local decisions in accordance with the Act. You can have due regard and still not decide to go with the finalised guidance, but you have to show you've had due regard to it. So you will then make a local decision on whether to implement the National Clinical Commissioning Guidance, which is guidance to CCGs. It won't be guidance to individual prescribers, because even with all of this, a GP prescriber still retains the right to either, for clinical freedom, to either prescribe or not. But you do need to take due regard in looking at the decisions you take with both your own local circumstances and your own health impact assessments. There has been a national health impact assessment undertaken, and that is included within the consultation document, but that just looks at the groups with protected characteristics. It doesn't look at any other aspects. So you may want to look at your own population and undertake your own impact assessment. So it's frozen again. I hope it now goes on to questions. So the important thing is now really to open it up, I think, to get your comments and your questions. So please do send them to us, either written in the box, in the question box, or if you do wish to speak, then if you wave a hand in some way, then of course you can wave a hand and then we can unmute you.
We've got 3 questions typed out. If you want me to read them out, Julie?
Yes, I'm just trying to get to the final slide. The connection with GoToWebinar server has been lost. That's very helpful. So can you take can you take control of the slides and put the last slide up, please?
We can see the last. Any further queries can be sent to.
All right. Okay. Good. I can't see that, but that's fine. So that's fine. So it is now time to open it up to you. So, Ellen, can you tell us what questions we've got, and we can then reflect on them?
Okay. I've got 3 questions so far. The first one is there a comms plan to inform public of changes in the benefit of fast self-management rather than waiting for a GP appointment?
Is there a comms plan for?
To inform public of changes and the benefit of fast self-management rather than waiting for a GP appointment.
Right. Barbara, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some implementation tools once we publish the guidance, but obviously it'll be up to the CCGs to then engage their local populations in that, and depending on, you know, what aspects they're implementing, whether they're, you know, going to be implementing the guidance in full and all of the conditions. But there are nationally planned, we're planning to have some communications, leaflets and things for patients, as well as websites and things that they can go onto and get further information on. So there is some planned activity, but that will be after we've published the final guidance.
Yes, we were approached as part of when we were asking generally about whether we should be restricting on these issues, and the desire or need for easy read formats of documents was raised. The need to be really clear about in what circumstances can these medicines be made available over the counter. So for some there are pharmacists only, so you need a pharmacist to be there to be able to buy them. So again, we'll need to cover those off. So there will be these materials made available. But again, as Bhavna said, once you've decided locally about whether you're going to act in accordance with all of the guidance, you'll then be able to access the materials to support that shift. We're also having webinars with, trying to set up webinars with community pharmacists and with GPs, because I'm really keen to engage with them about what they feel they need to be able to successfully implement the guidance if that's the decision that is taken. So we have got those planned during February, I hope.
Okay, so I think you sort of answered the second question there as well. The third question is, what saving in GP time is estimated if successful?
57 million appointments, according to the slides. £2 billion worth. So yeah, we are not going to, I'm sure, have 100% implementation across the piece. But if we can, you know, sort of really go at the majority of the 136 million, which is the money we spend on those medicines, and you know, that should help. But we know general practice is under extreme pressure and strain, and so anything we can do to help will be hugely, I hope, appreciated. Yeah.
There's not any more typed questions, so I don't know if anyone else had one. There's a raise hand option. I can't see anyone put their hand up.
Does anybody want to say anything? Just in talking about comms plans, one of the things we have been I have been quite concerned about is the fact that we're struggling to actually really engage with the general public. So last week we had a so-called public webinar, and I don't think we actually had any of the general public on the webinar. Tomorrow we are up in Leeds for the first face-to-face meeting, and we have got 16 people, of which there's only one general member of the public coming. So I have had conversations with NHS England on Friday about what else they can do to publicise these events, because it is really important that we do hear hear from different groups. You know, the issue that we keep coming back to is if people have the inability to pay question. So we do need to get people's views about whether the exceptions that we've got listed, whether they go far enough to actually help prescribers manage that issue locally. So we are going to be publicising the events further. They have publicised them through all of their patient participation group networks, but so we haven't had a lot of people responding saying they're coming. And we're also going to be asking CCGs to make sure, if you can, publicise them as well, particularly the ones that aren't tomorrow. So there's one in Birmingham and there's one in London. We've shared all the dates with you in the last Focus On bulletin, so you know when they are. If you can publicise them, so that as well as whatever you're doing locally, you can publicise those ones, we really would appreciate it, because I don't want to get to the end of the public consultation and then find that people say we didn't know about it. So, any other questions coming through, Ellen?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. One's more of a comment which you might have touched on slightly there. This is saying, I'm interested in your exceptions. We've had a lot of feedback on the affordability of gluten-free products. Health Watch tells us they've had lots of people saying they can't afford £3 for a loaf of bread. So it's more of a comment.
Okay. Right. Okay. So can you go back, whoever's got control of the slide, can you go back to the slide that's got the exception up there? And can colleagues hear me? Because it says audio not connected. So as long as you can still hear me.
Can you see the slides moving?
I can't.
I can see them, yeah.
As long as I can, that's fine.
Which slide was it?
So it's the one that has two exceptions on it. The bottom one that talks about social, mental health or medical vulnerability. We've been concerned about this all the way through, and so we were trying to craft a form of words that would give the prescriber sufficient flexibility to be able to use it if he or she wanted to and need to, and to therefore still be able to prescribe. So the idea is that the social vulnerability bit of that phrase could encompass inability to pay, because what we don't want to do is obviously inadvertently increase health inequalities. That would not be the right thing to do. So that's what we've crafted, and it's actually colleagues at the RCGP that crafted those words, which were far better than the ones I had come up with. But again, we'd like people's views about whether that's reasonable or not. And from GP perspective, I've heard lots of different views. At one level, GPs saying, yeah, they think that's reasonable. It gives us enough flexibility, and then others saying, no, it's not reasonable for me to ask these sorts of questions or make these sorts of judgments. So we do actually would like your comments. Obviously, the question or comment was specifically around gluten-free. This consultation isn't about gluten-free, as you all know. So I presume that was sort of illustrative, but watch this space in terms of the outcome for gluten-free prescribing consultation. All I can say at the moment on that one.
We don't have any more questions.
Okay. Okay. So can I just sort of ask you a question? Do you feel we've done enough? Do you know enough? Do you know what you're doing? And that's fine. Is there anything that we're not doing that to support you taking your local action that you feel we should? Do please let us know. We do need to do something with local authorities. So I was prompted by, I can see Katie's name here. So we need to engage with the LGA. We did so in the last consultation, but again, we need to make sure we've done that for this particular consultation as well. So I will make sure we take that action. Anything else from people?
Does not look like it.
No more questions?
Oh, yeah, just someone asking if we can circulate the recording of the seminar, and yes, we can.
Yes, we can. You'll get the slides and the recording on our website as normal. So we'll just leave it a couple of minutes, and then if not, we'll conclude at 13:40. So is there any final questions or comments? Anything you feel we should do differently from this, or anything else, then please do let us know. But if not, we will thank you for your time in a couple of minutes' time. Can I check, have you all seen the graphs that have come out with the spend, or do you know where you can get them?
Someone's commented that they do not.
They do not, right, okay. So you need to go to your medicines management leads or your chief officer or clinical chair. They will have received the Focus On bulletin that I talked about. And in there will be a link to the slides, to the graphs rather, sorry. And there will be a code which will show you or identify your particular CCG as compared with the other 206. So you'll know where you are with your spend. So that's where you should go to get them. And if you can't then find them, then let us know. I know we've got Beth on the line as the Lay Member Network manager. So if there are problems, then you can let Beth know, and we can get the link sent back out to your medicines management leads. Okay, so there's nothing more then. I think we'll conclude this webinar. So can I thank you for participating and attending? I hope it's been helpful. Can I encourage you, please, to respond to the consultation using the web link that Bhavna highlighted during the slide presentation, and also let us have your views about if you've taken the action already, what you found and anything like that, so that we can make sure that we do hear from CCGs as well as everybody else as part of the consultation. So on that note, I will say thank you, have a good rest of the afternoon, and thanks to Bhavna too for joining me, and thank you and goodbye.